Thank you for joining us for today's program, and welcome back to those of you who attended session one. We're so happy to provide opportunities like this to come together virtually to connect you with one another and with Montclair State University. We look forward to being able to meet you in person in this fall. I'd like to extend a special shout out to our soon-to-be alumni, the class of 2020, who are joining us today. My name is Jean Morano, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Annual Giving and Alumni Engagement here at Montclair State, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program. This has been a very challenging year, and we want to provide some assistance with career resources. We know just how important professional development is to our community, so we're excited to bring you this program on Career Boot Camp. This program is broken out into 2 sessions, so this is the second session, and we'll focus on how to turn job interviews into offers. So have you ever walked out of an interview thinking it went well, but then you didn't get the job? Or felt a great conversation come to a halt as soon as you answered their salary question? Perhaps in one interview you felt a bit too nervous, or you simply want to polish up on your interviewing skills. We'll share some field-tested strategies and techniques and dispel some myths that will boost your likelihood of acing the interview. Before we jump into the presentation, please know that as alumni, you're part of a successful network of fellow Red Hawks that is over 130,000 strong and growing, with members in all 50 states and worldwide. Tap into your network by joining Montclair Connect, your online community, which provides you with valuable networking tools. You can search the directory by company or class year, look for resources like recorded workshops and webinars, use career tools and hire a Red Hawk, create your personal alumni Gmail account, start a discussion, and even join some networking affinity groups. As our alumni, you play a very important role in our future success. We rely on your engagement in a number of meaningful ways, from helping us to recruit new students to connecting with current students to serve as a mentor or to talk about your experiences, to attending events like today's program that bring you together with fellow alumni to help us as we build and strengthen our Montclair State alumni network. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Rob Hellman. Rob has partnered in the past with us on professional development programs, many of which you'll find as recorded resources in Montclair Connect. Rob has been in full-time practice since 2008. He's been certified by Get5 as a senior career and executive coach, and by LinkedIn as a certified professional recruiter. In addition to the many seminars he's delivered for Montclair State, he has affiliations with the graduate business schools at both Columbia University and Cornell University via inclusion in their highly selective networks of career coaches that they recommend to their alumni. And he's also taught as an adjunct at NYU. Rob is a regular contributor to Forbes, and his career insights have also appeared in media outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, CBS, ABC, and NBC News, and many others. Books Rob has authored include Advanced LinkedIn for your job search, business, and career, Peak Presentations, your social media job search, and the Social Media Boost. And he has contributed 3 chapters to Get5's book, Work Smarts on Leadership, Performance, Management, and Mentoring. So welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Jean, for that nice introduction. Hi, everybody. Again, some of you, I guess, again, the second time. So yeah, again, just before we dive into everything, I want to mention that I will take questions at the end, but feel free to type your questions in at any time using the chat feature. And also, you can get the slides at any time as well by just using this link, bit.ly/MSU 6221. You don't need to type www or HTTPS in front of it. Just type the link into any browser and you'll get the slides. Okay, so that said, I said I'm going to, I'm inviting you to type your questions into the chat feature. I'm going to start by asking you a question. True or false, the hiring decision is made within the first minute of the interview. Now, I'm going to, hold on for a second. I'm going to launch a poll here because I want to see what your responses are. Launch the polling and go ahead. Tell me what your thoughts are. All right. Any other responses? Okay. All right. I think that's, I'm going to end the polling. And let me share it with you. Hold on one second. Okay, so you could see that, hold on, I just got to close something here. There we go. All right, so you could see that almost 2/3 of you said false, a little more than a third of you said true. And actually, the falses win. So congratulations, falses. You have won. I'm sorry I don't have anything to give you other than just the satisfaction of being right. But the fact is that, oops, let me close this. Fact is that you have opportunities to turn a no into a yes even after the interview is over. I've seen it happen over and over again when working with clients. So what you can do after the interview can change their mind, change their opinion. Now the exception is, I say mostly if you're like way off, like you're ridiculous, like totally like a mess or just rude or something, you're not going to be able to overcome that. But if they're just like no, I don't think so, and you have an opportunity to change that around. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot about that, how you can do that. So let's get into the content now. So what I want to do is break up how to ace the interview into 4 parts. First, the strategy, then how to prepare. Then we'll talk about tactics, meaning what do you do at the interview, and finally, how to follow up effectively where you can even turn a no into a yes. And you notice here I say that the goal is to get the next meeting. I don't say the goal is to get the offer, because I don't want you to put that kind of pressure on yourself. First off, you may close too soon. You may start negotiating salary when it's still just a screening question. And I don't just you might get nervous just because you're I have to get the offer. I have to get the offer. As long as you're doing what it takes to get the next meeting, you'll be in good shape and you'll ultimately get an offer. Okay, so that's the attitude I want you to have when you go through this. So let's talk about the first element here, strategy, the interview strategy you want to employ. Now, what I was mentioning to you in the prior webinar, I was saying how it's all consultative sales and marketing in your job search. It's even more true in the interview in terms of the consultative sales approach. So what clients often do is they make a bunch of mistakes because they're not thinking like a consultative salesperson. They try to memorize the answer to every possible question. They prepare 3 questions of their own to ask at the end to show how smart they are. They waste too much time talking about other things and what the interview's challenges are. They're basically not being that consultative salesperson. They're coming into it like out of almost like fear because they feel that they just need that job so much, and it makes them less effective. What I want you to do instead of making these mistakes is to take that consultative sales mindset, which means that you want to keep the focus on the client's challenges, their problems. And I underline the word dialogue because I really want it to be like a conversation. Like they ask you something, you answer it. Then you ask them something, they answer it. Then they ask you something, and back and forth like that. Because when you're doing that, you're focused on the questions that you're asking, not to impress them. It's not about impressing them. It's about learning how you can help them so you can make the sale. So then you can show them how you can help them. Okay, so you got to ask the questions, right? And then you'll learn. Then you can show them how you can help them based on the answers to the questions. So that's the approach you want to take. And I mentioned research to form a hypothesis. What I mean by that is just pretend if any of you have ever been consulting, you know what I'm talking about when I say like you're going to have a meeting with a prospect and you think, well, they probably need help with X. So you'll prepare around this theory, this hypothesis you have about what they need help with. And then you'll see if you're right. You'll ask questions to see if your theory or your hypothesis about what they need help with is correct. They might need actually something different or something more than what you're thinking, or maybe you're exactly right. Regardless, you'll be asking the right questions. Okay. And the right questions are the questions that help you understand what they need help with. Then you can make the sale. Okay. So that's the key here. And finally, what you would do as a consultant is you wouldn't just write them a thank you note. You would go beyond that. You'd write a proposal. You'd do whatever it takes to close the deal. It's the same idea with a job search. It doesn't always have to be a proposal, but influence the outcome, right? An impact email, an influence email that's going to influence them. Now, and if you take this approach, what you're going to be doing is the way to execute this approach most effectively is have the right mindset. Like pretend you already have the job. Like you're on the same side of the table as them. You're just trying to help there. You're just trying to help them solve their problems. If you do that, first of all, you'll be less nervous. And secondly, you'll be naturally focused on how you can help them, which is their number one question, right? Which is, how can you help me? Is their number one question. In fact, they only have three questions that they're asking you. No matter what you think they're asking you, it's going to fall into one of these three buckets. How can you help me is their most important question, right? Once they think you might be able to help them, it's like, why do you want to work there? Or meaning, are you going to stick around? Are you going to leave in 6 months? Are you going to be motivated to go the extra mile? And will you fit in? So, meaning, will we enjoy working with you and all that? Okay, so you want to make sure when you're preparing that you think about those three questions that are the essence of what they need to know through the interview process. Okay, and again, if you take this mindset that I'm just, about that you already have the job, you're on the same side of the table as them, what you're doing then is you're making yourself open, because sometimes you'll be like, look, we're looking for X, and you realize, well, I don't have X, I have Y. Maybe I'm not the right person. I'm on the same side of the table just trying to help them. I know someone who can really help them. I'm not the best person. So then it becomes a networking meeting. You say, like, look, I think you should really talk to X. I know someone who can help you. But now that you know what I can do, is there anyone else you think I should talk to? Then it becomes like a networking meeting. You pivot to that. Okay. That's the spirit of your interview. I want it to be like a meeting of equals, not like you're going there so afraid and meek, like, oh, I have to ask them, just the right questions and I have to give them just the right answers. It's not about that. It's not about checking out that book, like 1,000 answers to 1,000 interview questions, or I just made that title up. There are books out there like that. It's not about that. Most of the time, you don't have to memorize the answers to every question, with a few exceptions, which we're going to talk about. Which there's another strategy you want to employ to answering most of their questions, which will help you keep the focus on the number one thing they need to know, which is how can you help me? Okay, so that said, so that's the strategy you want to employ. And again, type in your questions at any time. We'll get to them later on. Use the chat feature. So let's talk about preparation now. So I would think of the preparation as like a checklist, and this is what you want in the checklist. First off, how to handle issues they might have with your candidacy. Second, think about those before the interview, so you have an answer and you have a strategy to address them. The questions you want to ask them, again, to learn. It's not about impressing them with your questions. It's all about learning how you can help them, or what they need, learning what they need so you could show them how you can help them. Those are the right questions. And by the way, you will impress them if you ask them questions like that. Okay, that's a side benefit. Your pitch, which we talked about in the last webinar, your 2 or 3 success stories, which are super important. We're going to talk more about those, and why you want to work there. You want to have an answer. So I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about why you want to work there first before we move off this slide. So you should be looking to tell them why you want to work there. Find a way to get it in. And you could actually, a great way to do it is at the end of your pitch. If they say, tell me about your experience, tell me about your background, any of those open-ended questions, you give them your pitch, and then you tell them why you want to work there. Give them your pitch in the end, and I'm excited to be talking with you because, and then tell them why you want to work there. But be specific, not your company is great because this is the job I really want to do. Go beyond that. Make them feel like you get them, like you understand. I read a lot about the culture in Glassdoor.com. It's the exact kind of culture that I fit in with, and tell them what that culture is. Or something about the new products they're releasing, or maybe something about what somebody told you about the company that you know, or something you read on their website. Like, be specific. Then it sounds authentic. That's the key. So have a good answer to why you want to work there. Okay, now I want to talk about the issues they might have with your candidacy. Okay, here's the strategy for issues they might have. What you want to do, you got 2 choices. They bring up some kind of an issue. Basically, what you could do is address it before they bring it up, so they never bring it up. Okay, or if they bring up some kind of thing that I hate this question. I feel so uncomfortable. I get nervous when they ask it. Why did I leave my last job when my boss fired me, or I hated my boss, or whatever it is, right? Or why I jump around. I hate to have the answer ahead of time. And if you can't bring it up So to head off the question at the pass, and they ask you the question, answer it briefly and as positively as possible, and then pivot, change the subject back to them. So and tell them why you want to work there and ask them a question. So you might say something like, yeah, the reason I left was X, but you know something, it's all good because I'm really glad to be talking to you because I'm really, and then tell them why you want to work there. And I wanted to ask you more about X. So change the subject. Change the subject. So they're not thinking about this anymore. That's the strategy, okay? So if you want, if any of you have something that's an issue that you are uncomfortable with that they might bring up in an interview, why don't you share it in the chat feature? I want to answer a couple of those right now because I think it'll help everybody. So let me see what you come up with. If anyone has anything they want to bring up, issues that they are so uncomfortable that people bring up in an interview and they want to get some advice on how to handle them, feel free to bring it up now in the chat and I'll see if I can address it. Okay, any issues that people are bringing up that they're uncomfortable with?
We do have one question. How long should an interview last? I was in a 2-hour interview, a 2-day interview, both lasting over 4 hours.
That could happen. You know, can we save that for the Q&A? I want to answer that. If it's
Yes,
a longer,
definitely.
absolutely, it's a great question. Thank you, but let's save it for the Q&A because it's a longer answer and I don't want to divert too much, okay, from this. But if it's a great question, then.
Two people are asking about change, like how you would answer a question about changing your career.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so a little experience in your new field. Thank you, Julianne. Okay, so you don't have experience in the new field. So what do? How do you proactively address it? Well, first of all, you might be able to proactively address it. You don't have experience in the new field. You got to come up with something. You got to think about the competition. So you can't say, look, I don't know. I don't have any experience. It's going to take me a while to learn it. That's not great because your competitors are going to have the experience, right? They're going to have an edge over you. So you may not have experience, but maybe what you can do is substitute knowledge for experience, right? So you can preempt the experience issue by talking about, I'm an expert in X. Now, if you don't have experience, how can you be an expert? Well, take a couple of classes, read up on it online, learn what you need to learn so you could say, I have expertise or I have a lot of knowledge about something. Even if you don't have experience, say you have the knowledge, right? So that might be one way to preempt the question about experience, right? Another way you can do that is you can say, if they say, look, do you have experience in X? You could say, well, no, which isn't great. Or you could say, well, I have experience in Y, which is just like X, right? Which is better? Of course, we know what's better, the second way. So that leads to another rule, a golden rule of interviewing. So the first golden rule is to keep the focus on them and how you can help them. The second golden rule is keep things as positive as possible. Negativity is a no-no. So don't say, if you try to avoid saying, no, I don't have that experience, and try if you can to reframe it and say, well, I have experience in Y, which is just like X. Or there's a third way. And I'm spending a lot of time on this because I know it's an issue that a lot of you have. A third way, you could say, well, I don't have experience in X, I do bring something to the table that almost nobody else has. And that is this other thing. And bring up your unique competitive advantage, what truly makes you fantastic. You got to come up with this. You got to think about this ahead of time. It's important. If you say, look, I don't have a good reason for you to hire me, they're not going to hire you. You got to come up with the reason. Okay, that's part of like what I talk about with clients all the time. You got to think about that. All right. My concern is age, not lack of experience. So that could be either way. Age, are you too young, too old? If you're too young, it means maybe they don't take you seriously enough. Then you can overcome that by sounding more senior. Use more senior sounding words. Like, for some people that don't have leadership experience, I'll say, try to throw in words like led, managed, use words like strategy, vision, senior sounding things. If you're much older and you're going from a position where people tend to be younger, then what you want to do, the way you combat that, this is the issue they're really having with age if you're too quote unquote old. It's not about age. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not about a number. It's about you're going to want too much money. You're going to be uncomfortable working for someone a lot younger than you, or you're going to be bored and you're going to leave in 6 months, right? Those are the real underlying issues. How do you combat all those issues? The way you combat them is you show enthusiasm. You show that you really are into them. You really get them. You got to do that all the time. It's so important. It's even more important that you tell them why you want to work there, right? If those are the issues, if that's the issue, like age meaning they're thinking you're going to be bored or you're not going to want to work for someone a lot younger or you want too much money, show that enthusiasm. Look for ways to convey that you're really into them. You get them, show you're knowledgeable about what they do. It's super, super important. You'll overcome all those issues. So here's another one. Leaving a company after being committed to them for a few years. Is it better to say looking for growth or more of a challenge? And then another one person says, what do you do when you were let go from your last job to the company shrinking? Okay. So both of these are related to leaving like, how do you explain why you left the company? Let's take it even more extreme. What if your boss hated you or you hated your boss and that's why you're leaving? Okay. That's even worse than these two examples. Okay. What do? Do you tell them, listen, I hated my boss. The reason, quite frankly, I left because I love the work, but I just really hated my boss, just to be honest, right? Do you think anyone's going to hire you? I'll answer the question for you. No, nobody's going to hire you. They might have sympathy. They might even be able to personally relate to it. They'll say, yeah, that reminds me of the time I hated my boss and I have to leave. They may be thinking that, but they don't know you well enough. And it's a big, big flag, warning flag. They don't want to hear it. You are never going to get an offer if you say that, even if it's the 100% truth. This is one case where you cannot just be completely honest. If you are, you just won't get the job. Let me just lay it out there, okay? And I'm all for being as straightforward and honest, as possible, like whenever you can, with this exception. And they don't even want that. They want you to be business savvy. They want you to be smart enough to not just give the literal, honest truth to questions like this about red flags, because then they know you'll be able to do that on the job. You'll have their back. You'll be business savvy. Okay. So you got to say something, again, following the guidelines here about answering briefly, right? If you're not talking about how you can help them, you are wasting your time or hurting yourself. So what you want to do is answer the question briefly, because you're not showing how you can help them here, right? You're not learning how you can help them. You're not showing them. So you're wasting your time or hurting yourself. So what do? You answer it briefly, just enough so they feel you answered it. Then you change the subject. So you might say something like, look, I had a great run there. I was there for 5 years. I did a lot for them. They did, it was all good. But, there were a bunch of layoffs. There was an issue with whatever. And, I was just part of a larger layoff, or whatever you want to say. And, but it was time to leave anyway. And I'm really glad to be talking to you because of X. And then tell them why you want to work there and then ask them a question. That's the strategy. That's how you do it. Okay? All right, so again, if you have more questions about this, we can take them at the end, but I want to keep going. There's a lot to cover. So another thing, okay, the questions you want to ask, you want to prepare in advance. Remember, this is not about showing them how smart you are with your questions. This is all about learning how you can help them. I want you to be like Sherlock Holmes. I want you to be a detective. Your mission in an interview is to understand what the person in front of you needs help with so you can show them how you can help them. That's how you sell. That's how you sell them. And this is all about sales. It's all about selling yourself. Okay? So the way to do this is before you meet with someone, before you have an interview with somebody, you want to have a hypothesis about what you think might be their challenges or their issues. And you can figure out what that hypothesis is by maybe looking up their profile on LinkedIn or doing some research on the company or whatever it is. And then you want to ask them to see if you're right. You'll be then asking the right questions. You'll be focused on how you can help them. And you'll be learning how to make the sale, essentially. Now, this is what I want to stress here is that every person you meet might have a little bit of a different answer to what they're looking for into how you can help them. But everybody wants to know how you can help them. So say you're getting a marketing role and you're going for a marketing director role and you're interviewing with the VP of marketing. So VP of marketing is going to want to know if you can, this is my hypothesis, that you can do the marketing job well. You execute campaigns, whatever it is. And then you're also meeting with a human resources person. The HR person, my hypothesis is they don't know marketing, but they do know how to find problems in resumes. My hypothesis is they're going to be looking for trouble. They're going to be looking for problems in your resume. So you got to know how to handle those things, right? If you're meeting with, they have you meet with somebody in sales. Sales is going to want to know, are you a good business partner? You're going to be able to give them what they need to sell. If you're meeting with somebody in IT, they're going to want to know that you're not placing unreasonable demands on them, around IT resources that they can't meet. So if those, and I'm making this up, maybe there are different theories that you might have about what each person needs, right? But that's the mindset you want to have. Each person might have a little bit of a different answer to the question, how can you help me, that they're looking for. So you want to ask them. You want to ask them, keeping your hypothesis in mind to see if you're right. It's so important that you ask the right questions to learn how you can help them so you can make the sale. Okay? I'm sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay. So again, research is key. Ask the person who set up the meeting what people do. Right? If it was an admin, like who am I meeting with? What are their titles? What do they do? Get some as much as you can from them. Look them up again on LinkedIn, Google them, all that, right? Check out the organization website, trade journals, blogs, other websites like industry and company analysis, LinkedIn company page or Twitter or other social media. If you go to the resources tab of my website, again, you can, just like from the prior webinar, you can do some research on the industry, on even the individual companies that might help you in preparing to ask the right questions and to learn how you can help them. Okay, so just in terms of questions you might ask, like there's a basic series of questions that might apply to any job. And this is not like rocket science here. It's really, if I were you, I mean, it's just me thinking if I was in an interview, what would I want to ask anybody? Well, probably, how can I help you? What do you need help with right away? And how about 6 months down the road? It's just it's not rocket science here, right? Or how about a year down the road? Or, what does success look like? Or what is the characteristics of people who succeed in this role? How will my success be measured? Who will I be interacting with and how? Stuff that can and if you're still not understanding how you can help them after all this, what does a typical day look like so you can better understand how you spend your time? The answers to these questions will tell you how you need to make the sale, what you need to say to convince them they should hire you. That's why you ask these questions. But then there's a whole other layer of questions you want to ask that beyond this is going to be based on your research, around maybe you want to look up the competitors, what the products are that they're launching, whatever it is, that I can't answer because it's really based on your unique interview, right? But this is just the high level questions, right? And then dig deep. Be that Sherlock Holmes, where you're really learning how you can help them. Okay, it's enough about questions. Let's talk about the single most important thing I think you can do in an interview that'll improve your odds of getting another meeting or even an offer. Tell a great story. I'm talking about success stories, right? Come up with 2 or 3 relevant examples that are going to resonate with them from your experience. Practice them so you can tell them in a really interesting, engaging way. We talked about the pitch in the last webinar. Introduce them in your pitch. Remember in the pitch, we talked about how step 4 in the pitch was and if you weren't at the prior webinar, review it. Okay, so you'll see what I'm talking about. Step 4 was about, let me give you a couple of examples. I did A, which resulted in B, X, which resulted in Y, and C, which resulted in D, right? That A, which resulted in B, it's a 1 sentence or a bullet that you're saying that's interesting. That's oh, tell me more. You want them to ask you about it. Then you tell them the whole story. So introduce the stories in your pitch and try to bring in your stories to answer every question you get. It's so important because the reason it's so important is say they ask you a question like, I'm going to make up a typical boring interview question, like, what's your greatest strength? Right? Say they ask you that question. They're not going to remember the answer. It's like people have, oh my God, I didn't prepare for this. I don't, when I do mock interviews with clients, like, oh, you put me on the spot, I didn't prepare. Shouldn't feel that way. It doesn't matter what you say to answer that question because they're not going to remember unless you say something ridiculous. They're not going to remember. What they're going to remember is the example you used to illustrate the answer. So you would say something like, my greatest strength is X. Let me give you an example so you see what I mean. And then tell a really good story because as humans, we're wired to remember the imagery in stories. It's how our brain works. It's why we remember great movies we really liked or great books we read. It's that imagery in the books and the movies that sticks in your mind. I want you to tell a compelling story that's going to stick in their mind. That's what they're going to remember. That's why stories are so important. So what I want you to do every time you get a question, we're going to talk more about this, is the first thought you should have is not what is the right answer. Your first thought should be, can I use this question as an opportunity to share a success story in illustrating my answer? Because that's what they're going to remember. So I'm challenging you to get at least one of your great success stories heard in every interview. And you don't need 15 different stories. I don't want you to have too many stories because then you're not going to be able to practice any one of them enough. You won't have enough time to make them sound great. 3 great success stories that are resonating with them is plenty to show you're not a one-trick pony. Okay? So, and I want you to tell these stories in a way that's going to be memorable. So this is the format I would recommend you use. PAR, the problem you face, the action you took, and the result. The problem, challenge, situation, the action, and the result. Because any great story has these elements in it. Just think about any great book you read, any great movie you saw. There's always like the hero has some obstacle, some problem, some challenge, some situation they're facing. Then you follow the hero on their journey. It's the action you took. The result, they lived happily ever after. It's the same thing. You want to bring these elements in. And just like any great story you ever saw or read or whatever or heard, you want to make it dramatic, make it a big deal, make it engaging, maybe even emotional, make it important. Because that's how it's going to be memorable. And that's going to really differentiate you from the competition. Okay? So let me just give you some examples of things not to do when you're telling these stories. And then we're going to go through just an example of a story. So things that people get wrong a lot is like, you can see the guys yawning, right? Too much detail. You're going into all this detail and it's maybe starting to get too long. Like these stories should be roughly 2 minutes, you know? If it's much longer than that, too much detail, it's going to get boring, right? Too much jargon. They don't understand what you're talking about. In fact, there's even a term for this where you just assume people know what you know. It's called the curse of knowledge. You can Google it. You'll see pages and pages on it. Too little detail. That means you're not spending probably enough time. Your pitch is too short. Maybe it's only a minute long. That means it's not interesting enough. It's not going to be memorable. This is a really common problem. People talk about, well, then we did this and then we did that and we. They don't understand what you did. You have to say I. You have to put yourself, even if it's like, oh, so there's a place for we. You can use we a little bit to show it's not just you not working well with other people, but not too much. You got to put I in there so they understand what you bring to the table. Even if it's like, I partnered with my colleagues or I worked with my team, and then at least they're seeing what you did. Okay, very common mistake. People forget to tie the problem and the result to the bottom line. What I mean by the bottom line is, I want you to make what the challenge, the problem you are facing a really big deal. I want it to be important so they can see that what you were doing mattered a lot to the organization you worked for. So they understand that you were entrusted with a lot of responsibility. And similarly, in the result, you can make a big impact. Make it a big deal. Okay? Too little action. In other words, you might define the problem really well as a big deal. You don't really say much about what you did, and then you go right to the result. Take them on your journey. This is where they can see how you can help them. Show them how you approach problems. Let me give you an example. So excuse me. So I had a client who we were trying to come up with a good story, and she started out. I said, "Give me one of your success stories." She said, "Well, I was a key account manager in my last job, and I found out that this one client, longtime client, was thinking of leaving, and I really didn't want them to leave. I know it would have been bad for the company, so I was able to come up with a presentation, work with my team, and that was convincing enough that it got them to stay, and they stayed with us. All right, better than nothing, but missing a big opportunity here. Big opportunity to tell a really interesting story. Not good enough. Let's make that story way more interesting. So we worked on it. And after we were done, she had a much more compelling story when something like this. So first she defined the problem, right? So, oh sure, let me give you an so let's make this real. Let's talk about, remember we talked about like what's your greatest strength, right? That question. So if they asked her that and she was looking for another role as a key account manager or an account manager, she could say almost anything as long as it would help her to tell the story, because they're not going to care. She could say relationship building or persuasive presentations or coming up with solutions quickly, a multitude of things. It doesn't matter. Or anything that can get her to say, let me give you an example, would be a good answer, because they won't remember the answer anyway. So then she said, whatever she said, let me give you an example. So in my most recent role, this longtime client who was still was accounting for 1/3 of our revenue, I heard through the grapevine was thinking of going to a competitor. And this would have absolutely devastated us because they were still giving us 1/3 of our revenue. And we were trying to find investors or buyers for our company. And that them leaving at this crucial time, this client leaving, would have absolutely destroyed our prospects for new investors or being bought. So much was on the line. It would have really devastated the company if this client left. And the only reason I found out about it was because I had this really strong network of relationships. They didn't even officially tell me. I just found out of it because of these personal relationships I had built over the years with this client. So now you see how much more impactful the problem is, right? It's way stronger than what we said originally. She had this detail in and showed this is a bottom line focus, how much it meant to the company, how big a deal it was. Then she went into the action. And the way she talked about what she did is the way I think you should do it. What she did was she introduced how she handled the problem first before she took them through what she did. She didn't just say, well, first I did this, then I did this, then I did this. She talked about how I approached it. She said, this is how so now that I understood this challenge, I was like, we have to do something. I got to find a way to keep this client. I realized I had to approach solving this problem in 3 ways. It could be 1 way or 2 way. For her, it was 3. So you see, they're starting to see how she thinks. 3 ways. Number 1, I had to figure out what the problem was, why they wanted to leave for a competitor. Number 2, I had to buy time so we could come up with a counter proposal. And number 3, I had to come up with a persuasive solution that would get them to stay and quickly rally my team to come up with that solution. So now you see, she introduced the approach she took. So now they can follow along more easily when she takes them through her approach. And she's also showing them how she's very strategic. She thinks in a very organized, methodical way that she's going to bring that kind of thinking to them. They're going to love it. So she said that this is how I approached the problem. Then she took them through each of the things. She said, okay, so in terms of understanding what the problem is, because I had my network and they told me about this issue, I was able to get a meeting with one of the C-level executive decision makers, and he said, frankly, this is the problem. Like, they're offering this and you don't have this. And he was right. We didn't have this thing. So I knew that the only way to keep them was I was going to have to come up with something else, because we couldn't come up with this thing. I was going to have to come up with something else that was even better. So I rallied my team together. We brainstormed. I bought some time. I said, give us 2 weeks. Give us 2 weeks before you leave. We're going to come up with something that's really compelling. I think it's going to be worth your while to wait. Or give us a week, whatever she said. She got her team together on a short deadline. They came up with this idea. They came up with a presentation. They got a meeting with the C-level decision makers. They went as a team. She said, I and my team, went over there. we made a presentation. It was interesting enough to them that we ended up making 2 more presentations of different people at the company. And the result was they ended up not going to our competitor. They ended up staying with us. Not only did they stay with us, they ended up giving us even more business. And we ended up ultimately, because they gave us more business, ultimately it was a major factor in us getting bought, which is actually why I'm talking to you, because we were bought. And so, good story, right? And you can see the result also very powerful. Not just they stayed, but they gave us even more business, and we were ultimately bought by another company because of that, which is what we were trying to make happen. That's how you tell a good story. I hope this helps you understand what you need to do. Again, if you have any questions, type them into the chat feature. I'll take your questions, at the end. All right. So, okay. Again, just for people who came on late, if you want to get the slides, you can get them at any time by going to this link, bit.ly/MSU6221. You don't need to type www or HTTPS. You'll get the slides for this presentation and the prior presentation that I did earlier today on your job search marketing materials, as well as the LinkedIn profile checklist we talked about in the prior webinar. Okay, let's talk now about what you do at the interview, the tactics. Now, I want to talk about difficult interview questions. The approach to difficult interview questions is you got to think of it like a game. It's not, oh my God, I didn't memorize the answer. What do I do? It's like, how do I play it? It's a game, okay? You want to be strategic. And what I would think about is just what we started to talk about before. You got to reprogram your brain. Any question you get, your first thought should no longer be, what is the right answer? Your first thought should be, can I use this question to show how I can help them using one of my success stories that I prepared in advance that I know they're going to love? That really should be your first thought. And if you train yourself to think this way, it's like instant automatic. It takes you no time to think this way. And you should be dying to tell one of these stories. So they're just totally ready. It's like, it takes no thought to think this way. You're like, I really want to tell them this story. Can I use this question to get to tell it? Yeah, I think so. Like, what's my greatest strength? Or maybe they'll say like, so tell me what you've been up to. Just say anything so you can tell the story, right? Oh, I've been doing this. Let me give you an example. And then you tell the story. Okay? Whatever they ask you, try to bring in a story. Now, sometimes you'll get a question where you just can't bring in a story. Like some of the things we were talking about before. Why'd you leave your prior company? Why'd you jump around so much? Whatever it is, answer it briefly. Sometimes you can sidestep the question. You don't have to answer it directly. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But just like we were talking about earlier, be brief in your answer. If you can't bring in a success story, if you're not talking about how you can help them, be brief in your answer and then pivot. Steer it back to them through asking them, telling them why you want to work there, then asking a question so you can refocus on how you can help them. That's your strategy, just like we talked about earlier. Keeping that in mind, let's talk about some of these things. Like now, I'm going to go through a few of these questions. One time I was giving a presentation, and one of the people in the audience said, Rob, I had this interview. In the interview, they asked me, Rob, how would you find a needle in a haystack? I had no idea what to say. Well, how would you handle that question? So all I did was apply this methodology right here. I said, oh, well, if I'm thinking, if they ask me, how would you find a needle in a haystack? My first thought is, can I bring you one of my stories to answer this question? So since I'm thinking that way, my first thought was like, maybe I could tell them, we had this challenge in my prior company where something went wrong. We couldn't figure out what it was. And like trying to find the solution to this problem was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So look, this is what we did. And then I would tell them the story. So now you're answering the question at the same time, showing them how you can help them by telling them a relevant story, making it relevant to what they care about, which is how can you help me, right? That's what I would try and do. Similar about these other crazy questions you might get. If you were a car, what kind of car would you be? Who cares? You have to prepare in advance. Oh, I have to think of what car I'd want to be in advance just in case they ask it. No, doesn't matter. Say anything. They're not going to remember. What they're going to remember is a story. A car that you're thinking about a story. What did I use? What were the key things in the story that was so fantastic? A car that gets me where I want quickly and efficiently. That's the kind of car I would be. Let me give you an example. And then tell one of your success stories. That's it. Tell me about yourself. That's your pitch, right? We talked all about that. That's you want to prepare your pitch and tell, just like we talked about in the prior webinar. Any open-ended questions you get, tell me about yourself, tell me about your background, tell me about your experience, even take me through your resume. You've got your 2-minute interview pitch ready to go. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that means you didn't hear the prior webinar. So go review it. It's towards the end of the first webinar. You'll hear all about the pitch and how you should structure it. Okay. Why should we hire you? This should be really an excuse for you to give your pitch as well. Or give a success story, right? You should have an answer to that. Like that should be part of your pitch. Like, what is your value proposition? We talked about that in the last webinar. What is the essence of the value you bring? Okay. What's your greatest strength? We talked about it. Who cares? Who cares what your greatest strength is? Anything you say to tell you the story that's going to resonate with them is good. The next one. Give an example of some thing in your experience that's relevant to the problems we need you to solve. Give us some example of something you did that's related to what we need you to hire you for. Any kind of question like that is a gift. You should say, thank you so much for that question. It's a gift. You just gave me a gift because I have these 3 great success stories. I'm just going to pick one of them to answer that question. Of course, you're not going to say that literally, right? What you're going to do is just say, give one of your stories. Sure, let me give you an example. And then tell one of your fantastic success stories. That's a gift, okay? If they say, give me an example of an obstacle you faced at work, it is a gift, another gift, right? All your success stories involve some kind of challenge, right? Problem, action, result. What was the problem? Talk about the problem, the obstacle you faced. Tell them one of your success stories, right? Now, sometimes you do have to prepare an answer in advance for certain questions. One of them we already talked about, which is like those open-ended questions, like tell me about yourself, tell me about your background, tell me about your experience. That's when you give your pitch, right? Another type of question where you got to prepare the answer in advance is anything that's like designed to get you to say something negative about yourself. Like, what's your greatest weakness? Give me an example of something you weren't proud of, or where you didn't get the outcome you wanted, or give me an example of a time you failed, or give me an example of a criticism you received from your boss. Like, they're all the same question. They're all designed to get you to say something negative about yourself, and they want you to do that for 2 reasons. Number one, you might say something like totally incompatible with the job, like, oh, I tend to fall asleep at my desk right after lunch, or I tend to get really angry really easily, or something ridiculous like that, right? Then they'll just cross you off the list. But the other reason they ask it, especially at more senior levels, is they want people who are self-reflective, who can learn and grow. So the best answer to this question is, or to any of these questions, is an answer that isn't going to derail your candidacy, that's not incompatible with the job, but at the same time shows that you can learn and grow from things that didn't work out so well. So I would say ideally you want to pick something you learned about yourself a long time ago, not recently because it's not an issue now, and show that learning has helped you ever since, and that's why you've been so successful ever since. Like, just to give you an example, because I was just working on this with a client recently, I said, you could be, the question's the same. An example of a time you failed, a criticism of your boss gave you, greatest weakness, anything, right? She said, for the answer to any one of those questions for her was the same. She's like, look, early in my career, like 15 years ago, I got this comment from my boss, and he said, Susan, you're very smart, and I can see you've got a lot of potential, but you're spending way too much time dotting every I and crossing every T. And so all these other things aren't getting done that need to get done. And I realized he was totally right. It was a big wake-up call to me that I have a perfectionist streak that was preventing me from prioritizing effectively. And it was such a wake-up call for me. I took that learning to heart, And it's the reason I've been successful ever since. Like the 80-20 rule has been my guiding star ever since then. I've become a fantastic prioritizer. If you don't know what the 80-20 rule is, by the way, Google it. It's a way of prioritizing. It's very powerful. And then she said, and if you want to give you an example, and then she told one of her success stories, and bringing in that element of prioritization. Okay. By the way, one success story can be used to answer multiple questions. You don't need to have 15 stories. You can just keep using the same success story and just telling it from different perspectives. For her, it was like the same story she had told earlier. She said, oh yeah, that's example I gave you earlier. That was also an example about prioritization, about how I had internalized that 80-20 rule. And then she brought that in, that prioritization into that story that she had told earlier. So give me an example. Let's see. So how have you dealt with a difficult boss? Do you need to buy into the negativity here? There's a negative thing here. Remember I said the second golden rule after keeping the focus on how you can help them is negativity is a no-no. Positivity is a plus. Keep things as positive as possible. So you don't have to, do you have to have had a difficult boss? Do you have to have had a difficult colleague? You could say, I've never seen a boss that's difficult. I've never seen anyone as difficult. I've seen challenging situations and I love challenges. And let me give you an example and then tell them one of your success stories, which you can sort of weave in how it's always a challenge. Like it usually involves people. More often than not, or almost always, it involves a person. Like you have to, your boss needed you to do this thing. And it was short notice. And it was a big deal. So that was challenging. And so that's it. Tell one of your success stories, Similarly, this is where you can sort of sidestep the question, right? We're talking about sidestepping the question. Do you have to buy into the negativity of difficult? No. Do you prefer a manager who's hands-on or hands-off? Do you have to pick one? If you say hands-on, well, then that's kind of negative because it means you don't like hands-off and vice versa. You could say I have no preference. You don't have to buy into that all the time. Okay? Then you might say, well, what kind of person are you? And then whenever they say, you can say, oh, I can work great with that. Let me give you an example. And then tell them one of your success stories. Okay? Some more about difficult interview situations. So I had a client who said, Rob, I don't know what happened. I had this great interview and I never heard from them again. I just thought it went really well. And I said, well, tell me about the interview. And she said, well, they were just telling me about the job. And then we just started talking a little bit about how we both came from the same hometown. And it was a really, just great just talking to them. I think we really connected. I said, well, did you ever get a chance to really learn about how you can help them and what they were looking for and everything? I said, I really didn't get a chance because we spent so much time talking about, where we both came from, the hometown and all that stuff and some of the things we had in common. I said, well, that's the reason. You didn't get the information you needed to make the sale. You didn't really learn what this particular person needed help with. That's why. Somebody else did learn that and they made the sale. They were able to make the sale. That's the problem. So you've always got to, if you get off topic, if you start talking about something that's not relevant, you got to find a way to interrupt. I mean, look, do it for 5 minutes and then interject, right? 5 minutes, maybe you build camaraderie, you build a little bit of a personal relationship, that's fine. But then you might say, like, listen, I want to ask you, wait for a pause and then ask them a question or say, hey, what you said a few minutes ago really reminds me of something I did and do you want to hear it, That's what you want to do, okay? That's it. So that's difficult interview situations. Now, here's another situation that almost all of us have dealt with in interviews, right? What do you ask? What do you say if they ask about salary? I want to get your thoughts on this. What do you do? To use the chat feature. Tell me what your thoughts are, and I'll read your responses. What do you do? What's been your experience? What have you done in the past? Is it like, what are you looking for? What are you making? Like, what have you done? Seeing a couple of responses. I'll give you another 20 seconds. I want to see what other people think. Anybody else want to share what they've done in the past? Okay. I appreciate your responses. And it's a very difficult, it's a challenging situation in an interview. And some responses I like better than others. Okay. And that's okay because it's a very hard situation, you know. My favorite response is, well, there's some variations. None of you have quite exactly the right answer, but the ones that are most on track, I think, ask what their budget is so you can make a reasonable ask. That's part of the right response, right? Not answer it until I know the specifics of what would be expected of me. I think that's the best of the answers I've read. Okay. I would not give them a hard number and turn them off. That's sort of also directionally correct. Now, some of the other answers come later that I see. If you basically the bottom line is, and I appreciate your responses. Okay. The bottom line is you want to avoid giving them a number until after you receive the offer. The reason is it's a screening question. Before you get an offer, they are using salary to screen you out. They have other candidates. So, and it's so easy to give the wrong number. And I've seen like wonderful interview situations get completely ended because someone gave the wrong number, gave the wrong salary number. So that's one thing. Another issue is that once you get the offer, the leverage switches immediately from them to you. Suddenly you have all the leverage. They want you to start yesterday. They're not thinking about any other candidate. They're thinking just about you. So all these things that were non-negotiable before, you got the offer are suddenly negotiable. So you want to try, if possible, to postpone talking about salary. Okay, and sometimes you can't, but very often there are ways to delay talking about salary. And I want to give you a script. You should use this script. Okay. The first element in the script is say salary is not going to be an issue. I know we're both fair, we're both reasonable, we'll be able to work something out. That's number one here. That's going to work half the time. It won't work the other half, but 50% of the time they'll be like, okay, fine. And now you don't have to talk about salary. Okay. The other half of the time, they're going to say, like, look, I know you say that, but we really just need to have some sense of what you're looking for to know if we should move forward. Then you say, and this is a little bit more in the lines of what somebody wrote in their comment, there are so many aspects of compensation that I'd like to, I don't know, and I don't know what those aspects are. So it's hard to answer until I understand thoroughly all aspects of the job and compensation. Or even better, this is a better response. I think you have to pick one of these. I'm looking to get paid the market rate for this role. I'm still doing my due diligence on what that market rate is. I'm assuming you've completed your due diligence. What's your range? What are you thinking about for this role? Ask them for the range, and then you can say, oh, we'll be able to work something out. You don't have to give a number. Just say we'll be able to work something out after they give their range, okay? That's going to work. Now you're up to 80% of the time, but still 20% of the time, it's not going to work. Now they're asking you again. They might even be getting impatient. They're like, look, I know you say we'll be able to work something out, but we really need to get a sense of what you want. Now you got to say something. Give a broad range. The lowest you could possibly accept to the highest you think they would ever offer. 80 to 140 or 200,000 to 300,000 or something like that, right? You say, and you can say it's a big range because I'm still learning about the job. I'm learning about what you want, and I'm still doing my research based on what I learn about what the market rate is. That's why it's such a big range. That's how you want to handle it, okay? Because I don't want you to be screened out. Okay, so a few other things. At the interview, well, if it's in person, right? We're not quite there yet, but mostly virtual. But, if for virtual, make sure you're not having technical issues and that you're signing on late. It makes a bad impression, right? Get all that stuff resolved. Get on there early, you know, all that. You can mute your video, mute your speaker, just get on early, you know. Take notes, because now I want you to maintain eye contact, whether it's virtual or in person, but just jot down a word or two here or there, just so you remember what they cared about, what they asked you about, because when you follow up, you're going to need that information. And it's very important. I don't want you to forget what they cared about, what they asked you about. If you forget, you can't close the deal. You can't make the sale. You want to show energy and enthusiasm, because that means you're motivated, you want the job, and that you're going to stick around. You're not going to leave in 6 months. Look them in the eye, because in this culture, it means that you're interested. If it's in person, firm handshake, dress professionally. Now, for virtual, when you're at home, what that means is, for a guy, it's don't, like, this guy is like going to an in-person meeting in the picture, right? But for virtual, it's either a suit jacket and a shirt, no tie, or a shirt and tie, no jacket. Okay, don't do the whole thing, because it's just too formal. Everybody knows, like, we're all at home. It's super, super casual now in this virtual environment. So it just almost looks like too much, like you're a little bit of out of touch about how people are, what people expect. So that's how I would think about it. For women, it's sort of the equivalent of that, like one step down from completely dressed up. Okay. And, just on a couple other things for virtual, make sure, like, the lighting is good. Sometimes I see, if you wear glasses, make sure, test this out beforehand. There's not a big glare in your glasses. Sometimes I'll see that. And so you want to make sure they can, as much as you can, that they can see your eyes. That would be good if they can do that. Make sure you don't have some kind of terrible background. Like, I had a client who, we were doing a mock interview using Zoom, and she had this bookshelf behind her that was totally empty. It was just really sad. There was like this, it was just like, this is a sad bookshelf. It just needs books in there. It looked like she was moving out of her home or something, Like, look, you gotta either have a fake backdrop or fill that bookshelf with books, or do something, or have one of those fake Zoom backups. You can do that. That's what I'm doing. You should be able to see in my, right, that it's like a silver backdrop, So just be aware of those types of things. Okay. Don't have yourself announced too early, because it's just rude and they're not ready for you. Don't be negative. We talked about that. If it's in person, so don't do anything that'll turn them off. Fidgeting means like it's distracting. You're not paying attention. There's something wrong with you. Don't do any of that stuff, okay? Don't be an interview know-it-all. What that means is, sometimes, let me just say that we were talking about stories, right? Like making your experience come alive, making what you say come alive, because through illustrating how you can help them. Another way to illustrate how you can help them is telling them what you would do. That can be really useful. That can be really good. The problem with that sometimes is you might say the wrong thing. You might say something like, oh yeah, when I come to the job, I would do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, wow, we've done X before, it'll never work here. Or wow, this person is clueless. They're telling us they would do this, but they don't know our culture. Or something. So you got to be very careful. Sometimes it's exactly the right thing to do. And they might even ask you, what would you do if you started this job? But even if they ask you, I would be very cautious and don't come across as a know-it-all. You might phrase things as with assumptions, assuming X, assuming Y, this is what I would do. Or you might even say, I can't give you the definitive answer. I can give you the questions I would need answered to tell you what I would do, and give them the key strategic questions. Sometimes that's even more powerful than telling them what you would do, is telling them the right questions you would ask to get at the answer. That's how you don't come across as a sort of an arrogant know-it-all. All right, we're coming into the end of this presentation, and I'm going to take questions. So, at the end of the interview, you must ask, because I want you to, there's a saying, the sale, and I don't know who said it, but the sale begins after the customer tells you what their objections are. And this is all a consultative sale in an interview. It's all sales. You got to know what their objections are. Too many clients, and even in my own career early on before, I have 20 years of experience in the working world, at the New York Fed, at JP Morgan, and American Express. And I've had interviews where, like, wow, it went great. And I never heard anything before I knew what I was doing as a coach. So you need to understand what their issues are with your candidacy before you walk out of that interview. So you don't have that. So it's very important you ask these questions. Just so I'm clear on what you're looking for, how do I compare with the other candidates? Just so I understand what you're looking for. I'm curious as to how I compare with the other candidates. And also a similar but different but related question is, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? So you can get at these objections. Because for the first question, they might say like, look, yeah, you're very good, but we have another candidate who has more experience in X. So now you know that what you're up against. Maybe you can say something about that. Maybe you can say, oh, I didn't know you needed that. I have a lot more experience. We didn't talk about it. Or you can say, well, I don't have as much experience in X, but I do have experience in this other thing, which is just like X. Or you should really keep in mind this other competitive advantage I have. You can address it. Or they might say, look, you're the best candidate we've seen. But then when you ask, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? They might say, look, we still haven't found anybody who can do this thing. So we're going to expand our search. So you got to ask both of these things. Okay. Now, some people, I hear some clients say, whoa, can you really ask that? And isn't that forward? It is not forward if you're even anywhere in the ballpark. In other words, if they like you as a person, they will happily answer these questions. If it's really the issue becomes, if there's some interpersonal issue, if you're not clicking with them the way they would like, then they're not going to answer the question. They'll feel uncomfortable with the question. They might even get annoyed by it, but you would have never gotten the next interview or the offer anyway, so it doesn't matter, okay? In fact, they'll welcome you. They'll appreciate it very often because it shows sort of a maturity that you can ask a thoughtful question this way in a very nice way to learn, okay? So this sets the stage for a really good follow-up. Now, I'm going to guess a bunch of you write thank you notes after your interview, right? For all of you who write thank you notes, and for any of you thinking about writing thank you notes, I don't want you to write thank you notes anymore. You're like, what? What do you mean no thank you notes? Aren't you supposed to thank them? No, it's not about thanking them. It's about closing the deal. It's about you have just learned, you were Sherlock Holmes, you learned how you can help them, you surfaced potential objections they might have to your candidacy. You're going to use all that insight to close a deal, to share things that you didn't bring up, or you forgot to bring up, or you didn't do justice to, or that address objections they might have raised, and that shows you heard them, right? That and shows and further expands on how you can help them with their challenges and with their issues. Okay, it's way beyond a thank you note. What you want to do, you can thank them if you want, but go way beyond that. Okay, and the way you do this properly is, I help clients all the time with these interviews, right? And then with follow-ups. And sometimes occasionally, it doesn't happen often because usually I'll prep the client beforehand, so this doesn't happen, but I'll say, what did they care about? What do they need help with? What issues might they have with your candidates? I don't know. I forgot to write down. I don't really remember. What did they ask you about? I'm trying to remember. I can't remember. If you're never going to get the job if you don't know these things and if you don't remember, because you can't influence the outcome. You've got to listen for these things so you can address them in the follow-up, if not in the interview. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this, and then we're going to take questions. So this is a real example. I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm going to show you the influence email example. So I had a client, Julie. She was going to be a director of business development that's what the kind of job she was going for. So she was at this one company, and she asked she had a great set of meetings with people at this company for this director of business development role where she'd manage a sales team. And the interviews went really well. They liked her, she liked them. Then she had an interview with the number 2 person, the executive vice president of the company, had a really nice conversation. Then she asked him, so how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process, just like I'm suggesting you do? And he said, listen, frankly, I'm not going to move you forward. She was like shocked. Really? Why? I thought we just had a great conversation. All the other conversations went so well. Well, the reason I'm not going to move you forward is because we really need somebody who can dig into the data and analyze the heck out of this data so they can steer the sales team properly. And I don't see that analytic background in your experience. I don't see that you can do this as well as some of the other candidates. So she had no idea they needed that. She was really surprised. She was taken aback. She said, well, thank you for sharing that. I'll address it. She was so surprised she couldn't say anything in the interview. So what'd she do? She wrote this really powerful follow-up email, I helped her write it, which talked about her analytic experience, right? And she didn't say you had an objection. She didn't use those words. She didn't remind them about the negative comment they made. She just said, I offer a superior analytic ability. She talked about how great her analytic ability was. But then she took it a step further. She said, even though I'm great at analyzing this stuff, I realize this was not brought out in my resume. Therefore, I'd like to demonstrate my ability in this area. If you're amenable, I propose I analyze some of the department's spreadsheets containing sales data, and I'll present my findings to you. I'm happy to sign any confidentiality agreement, or feel free to alter the numbers if necessary. You can see this is going way beyond a thank you note. So she sent this, and she didn't hear anything for a week. She figured, all right, that's that. I tried. Got to go on other interviews. And then a week later, she got a response. Okay, here. And the guy had sent her a spreadsheet with sales data to analyze. So she analyzed the heck out of the sales data over a three-day weekend, sent her recommendations and the results of her analysis, and then she did something very important that you should do too. She said, here's the results of my analysis. Here are my recommendations. I'm going to get on your calendar to discuss it with you. It's very important you be proactive. Don't just say, looking forward to your thoughts, or hope to continue the conversation or something like that. Say, I'm going to get on your calendar. If you do the work, you are owed a meeting. You are owed a meeting, and plus you want to discuss it with them, right? It's just not enough to respond this way. So she did. In fact, the guy never even responded to her email. She just got on his calendar, talked to the admin, got on his calendar, and they had another conversation. They hardly talked about the sales data. Another great conversation. Then she said, how do you feel about moving me forward, my candidacy forward? Same question as before. Now he said, I feel great about it. Then she said, how do I compare with the other candidates? He said, look, even though you're great, you're actually one of the top 2 candidates. She went from being out like early on to being one of the top 2. One of the top 2, but the other guy who we're considering has done exactly this job before, so we're leaning towards him. So what did she do? She wrote another influence email where she talked about her unique competitive advantage. If you read through this, and you'll get to read it when you get the slides, she talked about now she couldn't argue that she'd done the job before, but she hadn't. But she could say that I bring something to the table that nobody else brings, or almost nobody brings. That's really hard to find elsewhere. And that's what this whole email was about. She got the offer. Okay? So read this on your own. This is the spirit of this. I'm giving you another example here. This is another way you can do it. This is about business writing. Use bolding, underlining, bullets, subheadings, anything that can make any email easily scannable to the human eye is good, right? That's what this guy did here. You can read that on your own. Here's another one I just want to talk about briefly about how powerful this is. You can even influence the outcome after you were turned down. So here's an example of a client. They literally said, this is the response he got. Look, we're narrowing our search down to folks who have done this exact job, meaning not you. We'll be in touch in the event we end up expanding the scope of our search with a wider net. So he said, we're not interested in you. We're talking to other people. You haven't done this job. So what did he do? He was going to give up. I said, no. You got one more step here. So we wrote this email. He wrote, I appreciate your candor from your note. It sounds like you're identifying some highly qualified candidates. So he was very gracious. Then he said, I'd like to note, however, my blend of experience that uniquely differentiates me. So he said, look, keep these differentiators in mind. And then he brought up these 4 bullets about what he brings to the table, even though he hasn't done this exact job before, that is very hard to find elsewhere. What happened? They totally changed their mind about him. They brought about him again, and he ultimately got an offer. So what you do after the interview is so important, okay? That's the message I want to leave you with. there's my website again. That's the link to get the slides. MSU, bit.ly/MSU 6221. A couple of books I have on my website and on Amazon. My email address, and let's take questions.
So we could go back to that question from earlier. How
Thanks.
long should an interview last?
There is no should, okay? Some interviews, look, I would say if you have one interview and then they want to offer you a job after talking to one person, that's usually a sign of a problem, with a few exceptions, usually a sign of an issue. So let's put it that way. They usually, I mean, what are they trying? Are they hiding something? I mean, are they too eager to get you? What's the issue here? Maybe there's something wrong, usually. In terms of length, some interviews are like insane, some interview processes. They could have like, you could have 10 interviews or even more over weeks and still not get an offer. And you might even be like the top 2 or 3 candidates, you might not get an offer. Or you might get the offer of you, right? But sometimes it's like, can be heartbreaking, but you know what? There is no rule. What I would say is a couple of things. If they're constantly canceling on you at the last minute, or they're not using your time wisely, like they keep making you, now, virtually it's easier to schedule things, but when it's in person, if they like keep expecting you to leave your current job and make another trip uptown for an interview like on 15 different days, and you tell them that's not going to work for you, that might tell you something about the company, like you don't want to work for them, right? But if you just feel like they have a long interview process, this is just their process, it's very extensive, and they're trying to be respectful of your time, it just is what it is. But what you should do, and this is really important, say you have like 10 interviews and they end up offering it to someone else. I don't want you to feel like, wow, that was a waste of time. What you should do is follow up with everyone you felt you clicked with and you got along with, but they just had to make a decision. They offered it to somebody else. You got along with them. You should even call them if you can. Try to call them before emailing them. And catch them, like maybe early in the morning before they start their meetings, before 9 or after 5, and say, listen, I heard you're going in a different direction. I wish you a lot of success with the person you decide to hire. So in other words, be gracious, be nice, and say like, look, I'm still in a job search. I'd be grateful if you could give me any feedback. It could help me with my search. Get the feedback. And then you want to say thank you after you get the feedback. Now that look, we've met, you know what I can do, even though you didn't make me the offer. Is there anyone else you suggest I talk to at your company? And then if not at their company, at some other company. I've had clients get interviews based on exactly this approach. Basically what you want to do is take the people you met with, even if they didn't make you the offer, and bring them into your network. Connect with them on LinkedIn after you get turned down. If, again, you felt like you got along with them personally. Have those conversations. If you don't, I would try calling them because they may not respond to an email because they just rejected you. Call them, make them feel a little guilty even by saying something super nice, wishing them well with a new candidate. Then asking them for just really short, a little bit of feedback. If you can't get them on the phone, can't get their number, email them and ask them for 10 minutes, doing all this too. Being super nice in the email, being super gracious. All right, it's a really long answer to your question. I just wanted to expand on it a little bit for everybody else. Other questions?
In your opinion, how many interviews should happen?
I have no opinion on that. There is no should. There is no should. It could be 10, it could be 1, or 2, not 1 usually, but 2, right? 3, there is no should. I hope I made it clear, there is no number. It's whatever their process is.
Is it possible to be overly nice?
I'm sorry, the question is it possible to be overly nice?
Yeah, like a little too nice.
I'm pausing because I don't know what the word nice means, like in your context. Like, I think you can be, I think the way you're using nice is not the way I might use nice. Like, if the way I would use nice, I would say, no, it's not possible to be overly nice. You're going to be nice. You're going to be considerate. You're going to thank them. You're going to say, you just smile a lot. You're going to be absolutely fine. At the same time, you want to be, steering the conversation. You don't want to be too deferential. So nice and deferential are two different things. There's nice, and then there's just like waiting for them to ask the next question, or not offering things, or not, after they ask a question and you answer it, being afraid to ask a question to see what they're, to learn more about how you can help them, because you're trying to be too deferential. That's different from being nice. So if that's what you're thinking about being nice, I would say that's not the same as being nice, and you don't want to do that. You want to be assertive. Being nice and being assertive are two different things. Okay, if you don't understand what I mean by that, ask your question again in a little bit more detail or in a different way. Do you think I answered the question, Julianne?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have an interview with a group of individuals interviewing you, should you send follow-up emails to each person?
Great question. Yes. Ideally, you want to send follow-up interview emails to each person. Now, the problem is sometimes you just don't have the time. Or like maybe you met with 5 people. Occasionally you have like a panel interview, right? And you just can't, maybe you could save time by just sending one detailed influence email to all 5 of them. And you might even in that email say, Susan, in our, in the conversation, you mentioned X, and then Steve, you mentioned Y. You could do it that way in one email to save you time. And then maybe you might send individual emails to each of them, just thanks again, looking forward, just to be nice. You don't even have to influence them, right? So you got to, there's like a trade-off. If you have a lot of interviews, it might be too hard to send individual emails to every one of them. But the best practice is to send customized individual emails to each person. That is the best practice if you can find the time to do it. And by the way, one more thing, just because you asked this question, remind me of something. Remember I told you to ask those 2 questions at the end. How do I compare to the other candidates? And how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? If you have a panel interview of 2 or more people, so they're interviewing you at the same time, you can ask the first question, but you can't ask the second question of the panel. You cannot ask, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward to a group of people at the same time, because they have to discuss it. But you can ask, how do I compare to the other candidates? That's a totally appropriate question to ask to a panel of people, because it's not something they have to discuss. They can just tell you how they feel, you compare. Okay?
If anyone has any other questions, please put them in the chat.
Okay, we got a couple more minutes. Ask anything. This about interviewing, there's webinar before, your marketing materials, getting interviews, negotiation, whatever you want. Figuring out what you want to do next.
How many hours of preparation for an interview do you think is like the rule of thumb?
Okay. Let me say, answer this question in a very strategic way. The first 1 or 2 interviews you have may take a lot of time to prepare. After that, you should have much less time preparing. And the reason that is because you are focusing on a specific job target. If you remember from the first webinar, I'm talking about a specific audience defined by the type of role, like the position description, and the type of organization or industry. So you should be understanding enough about the position and the organization that you don't have to do the same crazy preparation for every interview you get, other than the first 1 or 2. But, so I would say the first 1 or 2 might take you many hours, right? You have to come up with your success stories. But then once you have your stories down, you feel comfortable with them, you don't have to practice them anymore. You've got them down. It's much, much quicker.
And the last question we have is, how do you network on LinkedIn to get an interview through the door?
Well, what I would do is network on LinkedIn. I would see, for example, let's take an example. I'm going to show you something really quick, okay? Let's just do this in a couple of minutes, since this is the last question. I'm going to jump over to LinkedIn here. Hold on. Let me just, give me a second here. Okay. So I'm going to go, you can see, I'm going to go, hopefully you can all see that I'm on LinkedIn now. Julianne, tell me if you can't, and I'll,
We see, yeah.
Great. So say you want to work, let's do an example here. Say you want to work at Pfizer, I'm making this up. You want to work at Pfizer, they're in the news, right? They have the great vaccine and all that. Say you want to work in marketing at Pfizer. Here's what I would do. I'd click in the search box. Again, this is a much longer webinar, really, but I want to give you a little bit of an idea of what you should kind of think you should be doing. Click in the search box, press enter. Now you're going to get all these other options for searches, like people, post, all right? What you want to do is a people search. No, I'm sorry. What you want to do first is a company search. Search, do companies, click on companies. Now type in Pfizer, press enter. Oh, it looks like this is the right Pfizer, right? There's a bunch of Pfizers here. Pick the right one. Looks like this one, 4.1 million followers. Press Pfizer. Just make sure it's the right company. This looks like it, right? Now click on the 116,000 employees. Click on that. Press enter. Now you're not going to go through all these results to see who you know, right? Now let's do the hypothesis is you want a marketing director role at Pfizer. So what you're trying to do is find people you know who are marketing directors or more senior at Pfizer, or people who know people who are marketing directors or more senior at Pfizer, so you can network in. So that's your theory. You're not going to go through 115,000 results, so go to all filters. Go to all filters. Now, if you scroll down, you'll see the current companies already checked for you. Pfizer, right? And all the related Pfizer companies. It's already automatically checked because you went through the company page. Now what you might do is narrow down the results. You might do first and second degree connections. So first means you're directly connected to them. You know them. Second means people you directly are connected to can introduce you to these second degree connections. You might just pick those two. And you might pick region, right? Scrolling down here, you might do title, job title. So let's do an example. You might do something like marketing, right? Because we said the hypothesis here is marketing director and marketing and director or VP or chief, like chief marketing officer, or senior, right? Just you can only do 6 terms in these searches, right? I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then you might do or not. Look at these sophisticated searches you can do. Senior manager, you can use ands, ors, nots, quotes, parentheses in these searches. Now I'm going to click show results. Let's see what comes up. Still got too many. Still got too many. You can narrow it down further. But look what I'm coming up with, right? Senior director, marketing. Oh, this is interesting. And this is second degree connection, right? Let's narrow it down even further. Let's go back to all filters. Go just first and second degree. Let's see what comes up now. 19, that's a pretty good list. These are people, second degree means if I have a quality network, and you should try to know everybody in your first degree network, I can get introduced to these people. This is how I would do it. And you're finding the right people. Senior director, global commercial team leader at Pfizer. These are exactly who you want to talk to. Director, marketing at Pfizer, right? You're finding the right people. So one of many things you should do. This is probably the first thing I would do. But you need a good network and a good profile to do this. Okay? Anyway, look, thanks for all your questions. It was great sharing this information with you. And I wish you all a lot of success. And go to the link if you want the slides from this webinar and the prior webinar.
Thank you all for signing on, and thank you, Rob, for another fabulous presentation. We hope you found the information really great and helpful as you begin your job search. And remember to stay connected to Montclair State University by attending programs like this one and all the other benefits that your being an alumni of Montclair State has to offer. You can always email us at montclair.edu, at alumni@montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-4141. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.